So here we have the output. So this is the result of our factor analysis that we had just conducted. The first table we get is the descriptive statistics. It simply shows the means, the standard deviations, and the population size for each of the measurement items. So we know that, for instance, if we're looking at a scale of 1 to 5, that generally the opinions of the respondents are quite positive, right? Many 4s and high 3s. A few low 3s and then 2.9, stuff to keep in mind. But anyways, these are just ways that you can kind of get a sense of the responses from the participants. Here we have the KMO and Bartlett's test. So this is a good place to start after you've conducted the reliability analysis from the previous step. Here we have the KMO, measure of sampling adequacy, 0.932. This is above our 0.6 cutoff, and therefore we can say that according to the KMO measure of sampling adequacy, this data set is adequate for factor analysis. The Bartlett's test of sphericity, you can ignore these numbers here and just look at the significance level. Because it's below 0.05, we can further confirm the adequacy of the data and that it's passed the Bartlett's test of sphericity. So in other words, we are good to go, good to launch. The communalities table tells us the extractions, the factor loadings based on the items themselves, but it isn't sorted. So this is a good indication, a good way to double check that none of them fall too far below 0.5. We have one that does, so this might be one that we consider removing from a subsequent analysis, but for now we'll keep it. We'll see what SPSS has come up with. So here is our table to tell us how many factors we'd like to include in our final model. So if you recall, there was a 3-factor estimate from the study. So they wanted to know, was it environmental sensitivity, environmental attitude, and environmental behavior? Those 3 factors are what they felt were encompassed all of the items. But this contradicts that a little bit, doesn't it? Because we have 4 factors or components that are above a 1 eigenvalue. So because that eigenvalue is above 1 for 4 of them, SPSS is actually saying, hold on, no, there's not 3 factors, there's actually 4, right? And then from 5 down, even though it's close to 1, it's under 1, and so it's not counted there. So here we have the eigenvalue, the percentage of the variance explained from that item. So it's essentially saying 40% almost of the variance of all of the items are explained from that first factor. So it's a very, very important dominant theme within the research. So whatever that first factor is a very important one for the results of this study. Okay. So we can also next look at the scree plot. So the scree plot is just another way of deciding how many factors we want to select. Remember, there's no specific formula here. You have to base it on the eigenvalues, the visual from the scree plot, and then your own understanding of the data in the literature to say whether it makes sense to add a 4th one or not. Here we see that there's clearly 1, there's clearly 2, there's very good argument for 3, and then also I'd say a very good argument for this 4th one here as well. So you notice how the second is a significant straight drop down, another fairly straight drop down, and then it gets a little flatter but still quite straight, and then right around here it does start to even out a little bit, right? So if you were kicking a rock off a cliff and it were rolling down a hill, where would it likely end? And I would argue that it would end right around probably between 4 and 5, and therefore in this case we would also agree with the above that we have 4 factors. Okay, even though that 5th one is pretty close, it's not quite at 1, so we're not going to accept it in this case. Okay, so here we have a 4-factor solution, and SPSS has gone forward with that assumption. So here's our component matrix, which lists all of our factor loadings for each of our measurement items. Okay, remember above 0.5 we will accept it, but the closer to 1, the stronger that correlation is between that measurement item and that factor. So this is saying, for instance, I think communal attempts must be made to save nature very, very clearly fits into this first factor, whatever it may be, okay? But it's hard to interpret this table because you have some negatives here, you have some places with no numbers at all. It's a little hard to interpret this, and that's why we rotate the variables. So by rotating it, we end up with a much nicer looking table, especially since we've organized it by size. So actually, we can see that for this first category, the biggest contributor to it is this one. I think global warming has become an important problem. Okay, so the lowest factor in this first factor, or sorry, the lowest item factor loading in this first factor is I am concerned about the environment. So it's up to the researcher to decide, do you want to keep this here, or do you want to remove it and rerun your factor analysis without it to see if it makes a difference? Because you don't want items that don't reflect the construct, right? So here we have the first construct. They talk about global warming, ozone, pollution, species under threat, freshwater sources issues, scarcity, use of chemicals. All of those fit within the first factor. The second factor looks at things like political attempts, laws, communal attempts, changing consumer habits, buying environmentally friendly products. You can see there's clearly a difference between these and these ones here. So you might say that these ones are more related to specific environmental threats, right? Whereas these ones are more related to actions, political and legal actions that might be a consequence of it. The third factor we have, I think Green Star Hotels serves more natural products. Green Star Hotels are healthier. I have more faith in Green Star Hotels. So they all seem to relate specifically to the Green Star Hotel. And then finally, our fourth factor, people should buy memberships in environment magazines. It's important to make donations, join environmental organizations, talk to politicians, use recycled products. These are very, very action-oriented factors, right? So the trick at this point is to take this analysis and you would come up with names for your factors. And there's no right way to do this. Factors change all the time. The names of whatever it is that you want to make them really depends on how they fit in with the existing research. But let's say we would call this maybe environmental sensitivity because it aligns with what the researchers were looking for. These are sensitive issues related to the environment, so that could work. We could name this one maybe environmental attitude. They're not necessarily actions yet. These are more things that we think should be done by politicians and by lawyers and by the community, stuff like that. These ones we might call maybe environmental behavior, right? So that's our third of three factors that they identified in the research. But this one's a brand new one. SPSS has suggested. And again, we can call this maybe choice intention, right? I think people should buy memberships. I think it's important to make donations. These seem very much like choice-related things. So that is an example of a factor analysis, and using this data, this environmental-based data, to make sense out of how to take a large number of items and reduce them into meaningful factors. I'm going to show you one last thing here. If we go back to analyze, dimension reduction, and factor, we go to extraction, and this time, instead of based on eigenvalues greater than 1, what if we did want it just to choose 3, right? So then we tell SPSS we only want to extract 3 factors. We don't care what the eigenvalues are in this case. We press continue, keep everything else the same, and hit OK. And this time, you'll notice a few differences. So here, SPSS is basically saying, okay, if I have to put in the 3 factors, these are the 3 that we would create. Here's our scree plot, same as before. And then here is our new rotated component matrix based on 3 components rather than 4. So we have 1 here. They've moved stuff like I buy environment-friendly products whenever possible. Right now is factor 1. Factor 2 is specifically about Green Star services and products. And factor 3 is more around actions, right? So that aligns better with the research. But I would argue in this case that it would be worth it to keep a 4-factor solution because you're building on what is currently known. Maybe that 4th factor is very important in this data set.